Okay, yeah. So as Anna said, I'm in Pennsylvania, and I actually was born and raised here in Pennsylvania, and then I left for 12 years to go to University of Delaware and University of Manitoba, and then I landed right back here, and I think I'll be here probably forever. Um, and lucky for me, I happen to be living in the county that first had spotted lanternflies for the United States. So I'm gonna kind of tell you a bit of a story, and hopefully you'll understand these insects a bit more tonight. So this is our beautiful adult lanternfly. Um, these insects are plant hoppers, so kind of related to cicadas and that type of insect. They have this um, piercing mouth part that's just like a straw. The only thing they can do is poke into plants and suck out their sap. They cannot chew, they just suck. Um, since they arrived in Pennsylvania, the entomologists really jumped on this and started learning about them. And as it turns out, they feed on over 170 different plant species. So that gives us some challenges in controlling them because they'll eat almost anything. Um, so I just want to show you, I hope this video will play for you, what it looks like in a heavy infestation in the fall, so this time of year, what a tree can look like. So this is the trunk of a tree, and if you look at that, these are what the aggregations of these insects look like at this time of the year. It's really, really quite dramatic. Whoops. So the eggs will hatch in spring, say May, and you'll have little nymphs running around or hopping around, sucking from those 170 some odd plants. And then in September here in Pennsylvania, the adults will gather together, of course, for mating purposes. And they will choose a tree and all gather on it. That tree is something that they're going to be feeding on. They actually have to feed quite extensively before they mature and can start laying eggs. So there's like several weeks where they're gathering and feeding. And really, they're just sucking plant sap, which is essentially sugar water with a tiny bit of minerals. And their bodies are made to just pretty much shunt the sugar water straight through their body and absorb the parts of that they need. So one thing they do is they sequester plant chemicals. You might have noticed that they have that red underwing that's like a flash of color that is a warning that they are bitter tasting. But other than that, and a few minerals, they're shunting the liquid out. So here you can see the understory plants. They got covered with basically sugar water. Here's the base of a tree where there were lots of them. And so if when you make sugar water for your bees, if you leave it sitting around or in the sun, it's going to grow mold. And this honeydew, which is the name of the excrement, also grows mold. So people have been classifying this mold. It's called sooty mold, and it's a real problem for photosynthesis for these plants. And also, I don't even have any slides in here about the agricultural impacts of these insects other than on honeybees, but they really, really love grapes and grapevines. And it's not that they're poking or sucking on the grapes themselves, but on the vines, which kind of makes them wither. And then their honeydew will cover the grapes, and then the grapes will grow mold. And nobody wants to eat or make wine from grapes with mold on them. So when the lanternflies first arrived in Pennsylvania and it was recognized that they're a problem, entomologists determined that one of their very favorite host plants for this time of year when they're adults, when they're gathering, is tree of heaven. So tree of heaven, the genus name is Ailanthus, and these trees also came from Asia, where the lanternflies also came from. However, tree of heaven's been here for over 200 years, so it's called a naturalized species. It's pretty widespread in the US. So it has let the lanternflies also spread. So the officials would come, of course, it was Pennsylvania Department of Ag at first, since it was only in our state, and they would come to an area and go through the forest and either physically remove the trees or do what they call hack and squirt, where they would girdle the trees by chopping the bark around in a circle and then putting herbicide in there. And however, they would leave behind a few. So tree of heaven is a tree that flowers, and it also has male plants and female plants. So of course they would kill all the females and most of the males, leave a few males behind, and treat them with a systemic insecticide. So those trees would be treated with either dinotefuran or imidacloprid. It would be a bark spray, and then it would absorb into the plant and be in the phloem then, so that when the lanternflies were looking for tree of heaven, the only ones they would find would be these treated trees, which we call trap trees. They would gather on there, feed, and die. So people went around looking at these trap trees, and you would just see piles of lanternflies underneath. So lanternflies arrived in Berks County, Pennsylvania, where I live, in 2014. They came on some rocks that we imported from Asia. I didn't really know we didn't have enough rocks in Pennsylvania, but apparently these are special rocks. The egg masses were just really camouflage on these rocks. And then the nymphs hatched out and they became established. So that was in 2014 when we recognized that they were here. And by 2017, people were starting to get concerned about the impacts of what they were doing to treat for lanternflies on non-target insects. And in particular, I was asked to look at the impact on honeybees. So the Pennsylvania Department of Ag said, what do you need? And I said, well, I think that we should set up some sentinel hives in the areas with the trap trees, and then we can sample the bees and the honey and the wax and see if they're actually getting into the pesticide from your treatments. So on this map here, what you can see is the gray little circles are trap trees. So those are the trees that are left standing and treated with the systemic pesticide. I came in and put pairs of sentinel hives nearby. And the blue here is your 2-mile buffer. So 2 miles from any trap tree. Then when we get to the dark one, we have a 5-mile buffer. So I had 2 pairs of colonies right in the thick of everything, and then 2 up here where they were between areas with lanternflies, but without trap trees. So this was sort of the minimal experiment that we ran. And I told you that these trees flower. So of course, systemic pesticides can go into all parts of the plant, including nectar and pollen. And while I did try to see bees foraging on the flowers, I didn't. Mostly I saw flies. I also tried to collect nectar from those flowers, and I couldn't even get like a minuscule drop. So it didn't really seem anything very attractive to honeybees. But nonetheless, people do claim that they make tree of heaven honey. So I knew that it was important to test. So I tested the colonies, the sentinel colonies, 3 times in the year. The first time was June 1st. That would be before the trees had flowered. July 3rd, July 21st, which is after they flowered, but before the adults were aggregating on the trees. And then October 11th, when I was sure that it was fall honey collected when those adults would have been feeding on the sap. As it turns out, even though we used very, very sophisticated equipment, we absolutely did not find any of the pesticide in any of the samples at any time. In addition, the honey that they made was light and delicious. And like I said, it was a very sensitive machine. We could get down to 3 parts per million. It's very, very specifically looking for dinotefuran, which is the pesticide that was used on the trap trees near my colonies. I did also get a sample. It wasn't really quantitative, but I took some tissue paper and put it onto the lanternfly honeydew that was like, I mean, they pee everywhere, like you want an umbrella standing under them. And so some of them would have like a droplet of honeydew on their body from someone else peeing on them. So I collected, I whipped up some of that liquid. I didn't know how much I got, but we ran that sample as well, and we did find dinotrophin. So it is, even though I didn't find it, I do think it's possible that the bees could be bringing this back. The other thing I had was a bit of money to pay some undergraduates to do observations. So I had them go at different times of the day and stand by these aggregations for 10 minutes at a time and write down every insect they saw coming to the liquid. And so there were lots and lots of fruit flies, ants, European hornets were coming because they're predators. They were kind of secondary, coming after other things that were coming there. We did see a few honeybees, but in all of our observations over months, we saw like 6. When I saw them, I did not see them loading up, and I did not see them recruiting. So it's not like it was like covered in honeybees. So in my mind in 2017, I was like, this is not going to be a problem. Honeybees are not interested. And also it pretty much ferments pretty quickly, and they don't really collect fermented liquids. So I published this paper. You can go ahead and read how I found nothing. Really exciting. From then, I kind of was trying to distance myself from that. I'm not really that interested in lanternflies, and I didn't think it was an issue. But reports continued to come in of people seeing honeybees on the liquid, until finally in 2019, multiple people called Penn State Extension, entomology, and said, "What? I'm a beekeeper, and I just collected some honey that is extremely strange. I have no idea what flower it could be coming from. It's at a time when it's normally a dearth. What is this weird stuff?" Okay, so here you can see a picture of it. I would describe it as having a smoky smell, and a lingering aftertaste that I really don't like very much. And so I was thinking, since I sent Anna and Megan some samples, that maybe they could open them up right now and have a little taste, and you guys can see what they think.
So Anna's at home, but I'm in the office. They're right across the room, so I'll grab them.
Anna, did you bring it? You brought it home. Okay.
I'm prepared. And I'll let you all know I did try it yesterday just because I was nervous about what face I was going to make on camera. But I don't think Megan's tried it yet.
Okay, let's not bias her.
All right, Megan, tell us when you're ready.
Oh.
Well.
Oops.
So you see it's very, very dark.
Let's see.
Mm-hmm. So first give it a smell. Describe it. Does it smell like honey?
Well, in full disclosure, I'm an avid honey eater, but not a savvy honey taster.
Okay. Smells to me a little bit like molasses and a little bit sweet.
Yeah, it definitely smells like honey, but not exactly like honey. It's really thick. Right here. Okay. I hope this isn't that
person.
I know. Are you going, Anna? Oh, it's not that bad. I feel like people who like buckwheat honey would like it.
Yeah, that was my response yesterday when I tried it for the first time. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It does have some like interesting flavor to it. It's not as sweet as honey. I did share it yesterday with a group of undergrad students here at MSU, and there were, I think, 11 students in the group, and a few of them liked it more than their own club's honey. So it's definitely, not something that everyone was excited about, but for some people, especially it seemed like the people who thought, honey is kind of on the sweeter side, they seem to like this one.
I can definitely get, I think you said like smoky, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely taste that in it. And I agree, it's not super, super sweet.
And
So,
one thing that we wanted to share, so Robyn sent us these jars of honey. I'm going to be at the Michigan Beekeepers Association's fall conference in Muskegon this Saturday, and I'll have some jars there if you all want to try it. So that's another reason to go to the conference.
you won't have to
Yes.
do it on video though in front of a bunch of people. So
Thank you for being my guinea pigs.
Thanks, Robyn.
I was actually expecting someone to make a bad face.
It does have an aftertaste.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's definitely strong. Like it's definitely not a gentle honey, but it's I think I thought it was going to be so much worse just because I've seen the videos of it squirting out of their butts. Like
Just don't think about what it is. Okay. So people started calling in, they were confused. And so I also started asking around, like, can somebody get some video of the bees, collecting the stuff? And this guy here, Bruce Rodriguez, who's in Berks County as well, was talking. He has like a sort of a YouTube presence, and he was just, you can see the honeydew had gone down onto this vegetation, and his bees were just filling up. I mean, what else would they be getting off of a leaf, right? You can see how liquidy they look. They look all shiny, these leaves.
Basically like just sugar syrup hanging on all the trees.
You can see it dripping here. Oh, there's just so much.
Man, it's hard to get it on a video, but
Anyway, so it's pretty clear that it is of interest to the bees. I did do a taste test that first fall because I was already getting together with like the top 30 beekeepers in my state were coming to a meeting that I was having. And so I was like, I'm going to do a blind taste test. I'm not going to tell them what this is. And I'm going to ask them where did this honey come from? Like if there was some plant, they would know. And so we did like a taste test where we had them rate from 1 to 3, 1 being the lowest, 3 being the highest, these 5 honeys. By the way, stingless bee honey, which is extremely hard to get and expensive, is so sweet. It's like a lollipop. Anyway, that was the fun part for me of this taste test. Anyway, so you can see that on the sweetness rating, it rated very low, pretty high on bitterness. Some people think it has a fruity flavor or a molasses flavor. And as far as the aftertaste being pleasant, it's pretty low. And I agree, that's the worst part, is the aftertaste. So none of these beekeepers had any idea where this honey could have come from, any floral source that they knew of. So in learning about lanternflies, what you can see here is the life cycle. So here's the egg masses. I think I have more pictures of these, and there's lots of websites where you can see them. There's these eggs laid in rows, and then they cover it with like what looks like clay. So it's really camouflage. That's how they overwinter. Then they hatch out as these little black nymphs with white dots. They have 3 or 4 growth stages in there. Then they become a red insect with white spots before becoming an adult. So those things are happening. The hatching of the first nymphs is in May. By June, they're going to be into that stage, the red stage. And then the adults come out. I really start seeing them mid-August, but I guess some are early and they're ready in July. But it's really September into October when you can see the adults like out in great numbers. So here in Pennsylvania, our nectar flow is about mid-April through mid-July. And then some areas have a bit of a fall flow. We have some goldenrod, and in some areas there's heavy Japanese knotweed invasion, which makes great honey. But for the most part, we think of, July, August is a dearth. And then in the fall, you kind of hope they're just going to fill up their coffers for the winter. But the dearth overlaps with when the adult lanternflies are aggregating and giving off all of this honeydew. So it's the perfect timing for the bees to find this source because there's really not much else. We do have some hive scale data to show that this is normal. So this is, you know, a place without lanternflies. After July 4th, there's really, you know, enough nectar coming in to kind of hold their own, but they're not gaining weight. However, in the Berks County's lanternfly quarantine, they were gaining weight very strangely, when normally it's just kind of plateaued at that time. So, you know, we heard about this in September or October, and our state meeting is always the first weekend in November. Ours is coming up the 5th and 6th of November. And so that year I was like, hey, I'm just going to put out a call and have beekeepers bring me their honey. So I got about 200 samples from beekeepers around the state. So that's all here you can see. Mostly they're not in spotted lanternfly areas. But I do have here, the black and brown are trap trees. So that year there were some trap trees sprayed by the Pennsylvania Department of Ag, and some, the brown ones, were sprayed by the USDA people. Notice that there's some over here in Pittsburgh. When the lanternflies expanded, it was kind of across the rail lines and into Pittsburgh, by the way, if you're wondering about that. So this is our two sort of urban centers, Philadelphia over here and Pittsburgh over here. So I got samples. I was pretty happy. You know, lots of these ones can serve as a control. They're not near any trap trees. They're just normal beekeeping. And then lots of these kind of in the regions with trap trees. And I specifically needed fall honey. So I asked them, you know, put a drawn frame in your honey super, and whatever that one collects, that's where I want the sample to come from. So for all of these samples, we tested them for both imidacloprid and dinotefuran, because those are the two systemics that are being sprayed by government officials. And out of all of these, the yellow ones and the orange ones are the only ones that had any detectable levels of those two pesticides. So again, lots of them were pesticide free. Some of them did have imidacloprid and dinotefuran. So you might notice that there's two colors, so you can tell the yellow one is imidacloprid and the orangey one is dinotefuran, and some of them were randomly and places that made no sense, that lanternflies would have nothing to do with that. And also, one problem with imidacloprid is that it's so widely used for so many things, it'd be hard to pinpoint that as specifically being from the trap trees. But the levels that we found, when they were even there at all, were very, very low. So what you can see here is work done by a graduate student, Nog Fan. It says unpublished up here, but I think it may have come out at this time. But she was studying the impacts of these pesticides on both honeybees and some mason bees. And I was really glad she included honeybees because it helped me out a lot. But here is the response of Apis mellifera, so honeybees, to dinotefuran. And what we're looking for is the LD50 level. So that's the lethal dose to 50% of the bees that would come into contact with it. And you can see on this graph, like how bad it was, you know, the percent of bees that would die. And so of all the samples of honey that we collected, the highest level of dinotefuran that was in any sample was 0.022 parts per million. And if you'll notice on this graph, that's not even on here. So what that says is it is not at all a concern in any of the samples that I collected from beekeepers in Pennsylvania. None of them had any level of concern of dinotefuran. It's the exact same picture over here with the imidacloprid, where our highest sample had 0.006 parts per million, and that would be way down here at the bottom end of this chart. So the bottom line is we are finding the pesticide in some of the samples, but the levels are exceedingly low and not a concern for honeybees. And I would also say that that is not a concern for humans who are eating this either. So I'm super curious about the flavor and what's making it taste so weird, because if they're just collecting sugar water, It should taste just fine. We shouldn't have even really noticed. So one of the things that I also tested was presence of this substance here, ilanthone. So I told you Tree of Heaven is a preferred plant. Tree of Heaven's genus name is Ailanthus, and it puts out its own herbicide to keep competitor plants away from underneath it. Pretty smart. But that ilanthone is found in the phloem, which is what the lanternflies are making available to bees. So either it's coming through them because they're drinking it and peeing it, or when they pull their mouth part out, the sap is dripping and they're getting it directly from the tree. And so papers have shown, as I said, that they sequester that ilanthone and become bitter. And so what you can see on this graph is just, looking at how much ilanthone they found in nymphs and adults. And then here was their standard. So I thought I better test the honey for that, because perhaps that is what is causing the flavor. And as it turns out, it was at very low levels, 0.02 parts per million. And so I said to my colleague, I was like, wouldn't it be fun to have human trials to like have them taste things laced with ilanthone and see when they can taste it? And they said, okay, first step is look at the MSDS, the material safety data sheet for that chemical, and see if it's toxic. Because if it's toxic, there's no way they'd let us do that. And lo and behold, it is. So I couldn't do human trials, so I don't know what people can taste, but I do know that it was found in exceedingly low levels and really doesn't explain the flavor, because I'm going to show you a table later. You're going to see the levels are all over the place, but the flavor is still bad regardless. So another thing that happens is, let's say you have your bees at a tree line, and that tree line happens to be have favored trees by lanternflies. Well, when they're excreting, it's going all over your hives. So that sooty mold that you saw on the leaves can also be the back of your hive. It's really gross. And if you think about it, you think, well, maybe this is getting into my honey. So we had some graduate students look at the honey under a microscope, because they're these sooty mold experts. They've been studying it with lanternfly honeydew. And here's what they found: pollen grains. That's exactly what you would expect to find in honey. So clearly, well, first of all, honeydew honey is also part, plant nectar, but the sooty mold is not in there, not accounting for the flavor either. So here you can see, it's the first time I'm showing anyone these results, so you guys can feel special. I sent some of these samples in for ash content analysis. If you do a Google search about honeydew honey, which is what this is, you're going to see that in Europe, it's really bad for bees. They can't really overwinter. There's so much ash that the beekeeper has to like strip this stuff out and feed them, because the particulate in it gives them really bad dysentery and they die. So I was worried that that could be the case here. So what I have here is bad tasting, smoky flavored honey compared to some delicious, excellent, and good honey. And so you can see over here the amount of ash. So if I were going to summarize this, I would say that lanternfly honeydew honey has a range of ash from 0.5 to 2. And delicious honeys have a range of 0.26 to 1.7. That really feels very similar, right? So I would say that the ash content is not of concern, because other delicious light honeys had quite a bit of ash as well. I do still need to look into that a bit more to see what, if my analyses can be compared to previous people's analyses, or if it was a different one. And I'm not a chemist. I need to circle back on that, because I read that over 1 is a problem, and that just can't be true. So I must have done a different type of analysis. But nevertheless, these were all done in the same manner, and I'm seeing sort of the same range. Also, you can see here the levels of ilanthone, which is that bitter tasting stuff, and one of the good samples had the highest level. So nothing is making sense. I really want to solve this puzzle, but so far not so good. So it does make sense that this honey is the result of a lanternfly infestation. In fact, now that it's 2022, we definitely see when there's lots of lanternflies, this honey is coming in fast and furious. What we've seen with the lanternfly populations is that they're like heavy for a year or two, and then the third year they'll be like gone or almost non-existent, and then they'll be back. So it's interesting, but the honey collection also matches that timing. So the timing of honey collection in the year being August and September, also timing in terms of when there's lanternflies present or not, and where it's happening. Of course, it's happening where there are lots of lanternflies. I did send one sample off to Rutgers, and they did a DNA analysis, and they did find spotted lanternfly DNA in that honey. The sampling ended up being quite expensive, so I didn't pursue it any further than that because I think all the signs are pointing to lanternflies already. And the presence of ilanthone also, like, how else would they get to that substance if not for these insects poking holes in the ailanthus trees? But it's can be positive. You saw that the Anna and Megan didn't mind the honey, so it's not like you need to throw it down the drain. Honeybees have been overwintering very well on it for many years now, and beekeepers save money on fall feeding. There's one particular Berks County beekeeper who's had a scale hive for like 60 some odd years, and he is just absolutely thrilled when he sees the scale going up when he hasn't been adding feed. Last year, so one fall ago, the lanternflies were at low numbers here, and he had to spend a couple $1,000 on food, and he was pretty unimpressed. So he was happy this year when the lanternflies were back. You know, one of the only people that's happy to see them. The other thing is there is a market for this honey. My favorite story that I like to share with people, just so they, you know, it's a nice succinct article, is here. This is a magazine, Atlas Obscura, where they interviewed me and this beekeeper, the owner of Philadelphia Bee Company. And I also sent samples off to the head of the American Honey Tasting Association for the country. Like, they do honey tastings like wine tastings and teach you how to, you know, on the wheel, what kind of flavors you have and stuff. So they interviewed that person about her opinion of the honey as well. So it's a really nice story. And she describes the honey as tasting like, you know, wet fall leaves, which doesn't sound tasty to me, but it was a, you know, a positive spin. So there's a market for it. Some people really like it. It feeds your bees very well. So one last thing I wanted to share is I learned about a Philadelphia beekeeper who sent off one of his samples to Poland to get information about the medicinal qualities of the honey. So you may know that Manuka honey is highly medicinal. It's what they use in hospitals for infections that won't heal because they, you know, all the antibiotics aren't working. And so there's a way of measuring that antimicrobial activity. And he sent one sample off, and the results were excellent. It got gold marks, the highest possible antibacterial potential, higher than Manuka. So this is really exciting. I just sent off some samples to get more tested for this, just to see if this is universal. And so you can see it in a graph here. What this is showing you is what percent mixed with water do you need to use to be antimicrobial, right? And so you can see 4.5% lanternfly honeydew honey was doing a very good job. So anyway, that's very exciting to me. If we could sell this honey that I don't like to hospitals and they could use it to, you know, help people heal, that would be super amazing. So thinking about lanternflies and where they are, you can see here's Berks County, Pennsylvania, where I am, where the lanternflies first started. Light blue is the infestations at present. The New York integrated pest management program has taken over this monitoring, and they're the ones that update these maps. It's not that they update them like every month per se, but every time there's something new to add, they'll send an update. So this is our update from today. And, you know, here you guys are. You can see that it's also in Indiana, West Virginia, North Carolina. So they all want to hear this talk that I'm giving as well, you know, because it's new to those beekeepers. If they've only just become established for you, it's going to be a year or two probably before beekeepers start to notice, and the bees really get into that stuff. There is a paper that looks at what they think is their potential range based on Tree of Heaven, and you can see that the spread, it has only just begun. So if this is true, pretty soon they're going to be, you know, spreading more than halfway across the country. So what you can do as a beekeeper is be on the lookout, get to know these insects, understand their life cycle. If you see this, you know, clay thing on a tree or whatever, you know, it could be spotted lanternfly eggs. Remember, the tiny nymphs are black with white, then they turn red, and then these adults are quite, you know, obvious. You can recognize them quite well. I just remembered that there's like a Saturday Night Live skit where a guy dresses up like them. So you should check that out, and you can see all the details of the, you know, the front wings and the back wings. Know that as a beekeeper, not only could you be collecting honey from these guys, but you could be transporting their egg masses or them as live insects in your truck. You can see here, they just really lay their eggs on almost anything. It could be, you know, the underside of your inner cover, or the pallet that you have your bees on, or, you know, the tire of the old tractor sitting by your shed. Some folding chair that you had sitting in the corner. Could be really anywhere. And then you just toss that in to go camping, decide to throw it away, and they're hatching out somewhere new next spring. So just get to know these, be on the lookout, always be checking. If you're moving hive equipment and you're in that region that has these guys already, really look it over, top, bottom, side, inside, outside. Make sure you're not bringing it to a new place. Yeah, so that's all I have for today, and I'd be happy to take your questions, but I just want to make sure that, you know, every beekeeper that sent me a sample feels thanked. We have these several experts that are working specifically on lanternflies. Karen Rockasecca, that's our state apiarist, and the Pennsylvania Department of Ag, you know, provided me some funding for that initial work, and they're highly supportive of it as well still. So please, I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Robyn. That was fantastic. So I'm watching. If people have questions, they can put them in the Q&A. I'll start reading some of them that came in. And then also, if you guys want to watch the chat, there's a few links for more information from Robyn's talk. And some of these that you may have covered, I think they were put in before you answered them, but I feel like there was a lot of information, so I feel like people probably wouldn't mind if there was a repeat as well. So there is a question about when they're coming in, how much is them making the honey from the honeydew versus honey from the Tree of Heaven or from the host plant?
I don't know. It's hard to know. I mean, it's not from the nectar. So either way, it either passed through the insect or just fell down the tree. Same basic substance.
Good. And then there's a question about Brix readings on the honey. So
yeah, that was, I think, in my table. Let me see. So yeah, it's quite low in moisture. Like 15%, maybe 17. So yeah, that's one of the, I think, noticeable things. It's
and then there's a question about, so you showed that there was low pesticide levels now in the samples, but, and I know you cannot see the future, but what would happen if the spotted lanternfly problem becomes more common and then there's more trees? Would that potentially increase the amount of pesticides in samples?
Yeah, so you might have noticed that I was only looking at trap trees treated by, USDA and PDA, but homeowners get a little crazy with the stuff. And so it's definitely possible that there could be more exposure if people take that upon themselves. Luckily, they don't like spray for them. Like that doesn't work for this insect. So it's not like they're going to spray your hive or the air. So it would have to be something where they would come in contact with on that tree. So yeah, I do think there should probably be some monitoring, continuous monitoring. Yeah.
And then there's two questions about the ash that were in the honey. So the first one, what is ash? And then the second one is the relationship of ash to honeybee health in the wintertime.
Yeah, I'm not really an expert on that, but in general, ash is sort of like solid particles in the feed. Like for example, you might have heard that you shouldn't use organic cane sugar to make your sugar syrup because you'll notice that it's brown, it's less processed, and it has more solids, and that can cause dysentery. So that is the general problem, is bees have trouble digesting these solids, and it can, you don't really want to have dysentery in the middle of the winter. So there are levels that are of concern. I'm just not well versed in what those are. Like it's generally not a problem here,
right?
Yeah, I'm always comparing stuff to Europe.
All right, so then, there's two questions about what should people do if they see the eggs, and how do you destroy the egg scales?
Yeah, so one thing that's important is if you're in a place in Michigan that is not already blue on the map and you see an adult, you need to take a picture, take a specimen, report that to, do you have a Department of Ag? Is that where?
We do, and we also have an app called Missin. Oh, I'll put that in the chat. MISIN, that you can report. It's the Michigan Invasive Species Network.
Okay, yes, they would like to know about it because you're gonna help them monitor the spread across the state. So that's something to do, and kill it. Don't let it go. For those egg masses, people scrape them into a baggie, like using like a credit card. In fact, one of the little things that they give out with Lanternfly information is like this hard credit card with pictures, and it's like, use this to scrape those egg masses into a baggie and then put alcohol and throw them in the trash.
The link that I just put up for the Invasive Species Network, the whole front page is the spotted lanternfly right now. So I just went to it to put it into the chat.
There you go.
But yeah, definitely. If I know that the people who want to identify it would love it if you saved parts of it too for proof. Let's see. Let me go back to the top. Oh, any theories as to why this fly pea becomes more medicinal as honey than most flower nectar is?
I don't have no idea.
It is a good question. Yeah.
But like I have trouble not telling people that honey's like bee puke, right? But this is like bug poop bee puke. It's really fun. Especially for like elementary school boys. It's like hilarious.
And then you answered a little bit on the sugars or the content, I think already, but are there any novel sugars present, or did you look at different sugars?
That's on my list of the next thing to measure is all the different sugars.
Yeah, really good questions. So if you do have that sooty, sticky stuff on your hive components, what is the best way to effectively clean hive components?
Yeah, you can just wash it off with soap and water. Or like a power washer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
It's like, how would you clean up your honey spill? Kind of the same.
All right, and then there's a question I do believe you touched on besides Tree of Heaven, them doing extensive damage to grapes in vineyards. And that's true that that's happening. Is that the only case of, or are there other crops too that are of major concern?
You can see them aggregating on apples and peaches, but they don't seem to be killing the trees. They like walnut and maple. So as far as like woodland, trees in the landscape. But yeah, I would recommend, looking at Penn State Extension information about lanternflies. It's quite extensive. And they're just learning stuff all the time, and they have learned that there's something about the excretions of the males that kind of brings in other males and females to the tree. Like, they're not really pheromone driven insects like most of them are, but there is some substance in the excrement that makes them all come together.
So presumably someone's working on trapping then too, if
Yeah.
they're looking at the.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different traps. One of them is like sticky stuff, a sticky band, but it ends up, catching birds and things and bats, so people don't like them very much. There's lots of different. There's some little girl, like, as her science fair project, made a really
Saw
cool
that,
trap.
yeah.
So everyone's trying. There's something about using utility poles because it's like a tree, but nothing really great yet, because as you can see, they're still spreading across the country. So
Okay, I see one more in the chat. Someone's raising their hand, but if you can just put your Q&A in the chat, that's easier for us. And then when you're listing those plants, is black walnut included in that, of one of them that they're on?
mm-hmm.
All right, so the Q&A is, are there other places in the world they're becoming invasive and where they're actually native to?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, they became invasive in Japan, but they didn't have the problems that we're having. Like, they acted totally differently there. One thing that no one has asked about is like natural enemies, and they are finding some sort of parasitoid in the egg masses, but so far just not high enough numbers to make any difference. And some other insects do eat them. Like, you can see a praying mantis or one of those wheel bugs like eating them, and everybody's like makes videos and cheers for those guys.